Have you ever struggled to understand the light fall off from your speedlight as you move it further away from your subject? Do you struggle to understand why doubling the distance between your subject and your speedlight doesn't give you half the light but a quarter? Do you struggle to understand why, if your background is not quite white in relation to your subject, sometimes it's better to move the light further away from the background rather than closer? All these items are covered by the inverse square law. Let's get into it. According to the inverse law, the power of the light will be inversely proportional to the square of the distance. So, if we take a distance of 2 and square it, we get 4, the inverse of which would be 1/4, or rather a quarter of the original power, not half. Moving our subject 3 meters from the light, 3 times 3 equals 9. Inverse, so 1/9 the power of our light source now becomes what it originally was. If we look at our light drop off from 1 meter to 10 meters in percentages to the nearest whole number, it would look like this. There's a 75% drop in light from 1 meter to 2 meters, but only a 5% drop in light from 4 meters to 10 meters. On that basis, to get a correct exposure, all things being equal, if the subject were very close to the light, then we would need to set our aperture to around f16 to block out the excess light. If on the other hand the subject were very far away from the light, then we'd set our aperture to around f4 in order to let much more light in. Both photographs should look identical as they have the same exposure. So on that basis, we can plot out a rough estimate of where all the correct f-stops are to get a correct exposure level. Remember that light drops off very fast at first, then slower. In the same way we open up our aperture very fast to start with, then slow down the further we get away from the light. If you're shooting a person, especially a standing person, they have a tendency to move around. If your model is very close to the light source and he or she moves half a step in either direction, then they could be massively under or over exposed. However, if your model is further away from the light, then she can move several steps in either direction without the need to change any settings on your camera at all. This example also works in a very similar manner with groups. If you have all your subjects very close to the light, then the one farthest away from the light will be very underexposed compared to the one closest to it, covering the range from f22 all the way to f11. But if you move all the subjects away from the light source, then they become lit pretty evenly around f4. If you actually want one element of your photo to be bright and one to be dark, such as a background, if you were to place your model close to the light source with a backdrop some distance away, then assuming your model is exposed correctly, the backdrop would be very underexposed. If you instead wanted to have a bright subject with a bright background, then you would have both of them further away from the light source but close to each other. Even though it may appear complicated at first, with the help of the diagrams, grasping the concept that subject to light distance doubling will give a quarter of the original light, not a half, and understanding the umbrella effect of the spread of the light goes some way towards explaining how the inverse square law works, and hopefully over time will give you a much better understanding of lighting your subjects with off-camera light. Good luck with your photography.